It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, I'd like to start with you. As of this morning, there still seems to be a Middle East ceasefire agreement between Gaza and Israel. And I guess I want to talk to both of you about the political aspects of that, the nuances that take place in literally the last few days of the Biden administration.
Well, first of all, I think we do still have a deal. The last I heard, and we're taping on Thursday morning, is that the Israeli cabinet has postponed its meeting to ratify it over details of the prisoner release that they're going to have to do in some Hamas demands. I don't know if that's the reason or not. Clearly, Netanyahu has some problems in his own cabinet from the right wing. But I also heard that it's likely that they'll meet tonight in Israel, which will be just a few hours from now. So we'll see. But the politics of a deal like this, I think are really complicated. Of course, everybody wants to see the hostages go and come home. And and in the short term, the politics will be good. I suppose both President Biden and President-elect Trump, they've already claimed credit, and they'll both try to bask in the deal. But the thing I want to talk about briefly is the short term and the long term in these deals are very different. It could be very different, and these are very complicated things. When we discuss hostage deals and ceasefires like this, it's always the ceasefire and release of the hostages. But there's another component of it that is really important in the Middle East, and that is that in exchange for getting the hostages home, in this case 33, Israel's going to release thousands of terrorists. And the ramifications of that can be very great. Let me just give you an example. I think it was about a decade ago, maybe 12 or 13 years ago, Israel had a prisoner exchange for a soldier named Gilad Shalit, who was kidnapped by Hamas. And among the terrorists released was Yahya Sinwar, who led the October 7th atrocities, the terrorist attack, and really is responsible for both that attack and the brutal war that followed, and the Palestinian casualties, because as head of Hamas, he had no bomb shelters. He used hospitals and mosques and schools and UN facilities as terrorist havens and launching pads. And so, in the long term, that deal probably doesn't look so good. This deal was offered in May by President Biden, and we've been working on it since. And I'm sure a lot of people say, well, if we could, if we're going to take almost the deal, why didn't we take it in May? Right. But think about what's happened since May in the war. Sinwar was killed, and Hamas was much more decimated. Hezbollah in Lebanon was completely decimated. Lebanon is now, I don't know if they'll be able to succeed, but are moving to elections of a real Lebanese government. Syria has fallen. A direct result of this. Iran has been very much weakened because it tried to attack Israel, and the Israelis took out their defense systems. All of those developments are very good from our perspective and may very well lead over the long haul to a much more peaceful Middle East, with Saudi Arabia and Israel and other Arab countries making a peace agreement. So all I'm saying is that you can't really judge how these things are going to work out. So, you'll get some passing political gain, I suppose, for the immediate deal, but people will forget that, and over the long haul, we'll see how it works out. So basically, we ought to rejoice in the release of the hostages, but the long-term consequences of deals like this are very far from certain.
Craig, what are your early takeaways?
Yeah, I'll start where Al left off. I think this is an incredible transition story. We have had a struggle over the past with hostages. We're passionate, understandably, about bringing them home and seek to do deals to get them released. And it's always difficult, and somehow it seems to fall around election time. But I think you have to give both sides, first of all, a lot of credit. This is clearly a deal designed by the Biden administration, worked by, I think, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and I also think considerable work done by the CIA Director William Burns, who both of whom gained, I believe, the trust of leaders throughout the Middle East in order to bring this to a conclusion. It took a long time. There's no question that our election impacted the thinking of the people in the region. In my mind, there's no question. There's no question that it was extraordinarily smart to bring the Trump national security people into this process, bring them to the table, allow them to engage, and to demonstrate to the leadership in the region that there is continuity here. I don't know whether the phrase was ever used, but I have a sense that the message was, hey, this is the best deal you're going to get, and you better get it before January 20th. I certainly think that is the case. For Biden and his team, kudos for driving this and never giving up, continuing the fight. Whether it could have happened with a Harris election or not, who knows? It's all speculation. I do think the Trump election had something to do with it, and I do think that the Trump transition team on the national security side effectively engaged, and that made a difference. The problem going forward is, I think, what I sort of think of as performance risk, because the deal, at least as shared and outlined, has three distinct phases over a period of time. And we're bumping along, one night, with one overnight, we're bumping along to get into the first phase. And on January 20th, the Trump administration, who were not the architects of this deal, are suddenly going to have to perform in order to really fulfill the promise of the deal through three phases. And even the most gifted of diplomats and national security advisors have struggled in that region to actually see things through. So I think at this point, both sides deserve credit. I think absolute, as Al said, absolute kudos for getting it done, for the possibility of finally bringing hostages out. What a huge relief, and let a rebuilding process begin, which is going to take decades, it looks like. But the risk going forward is just as substantial as it always is in that region, and and that's a risk for the Trump administration, who now has to perform and trying to push this forward.
Al, Joe Biden will be leaving the White House next week. I do want to get both of your assessment of the Biden years.
Well, first of all, Joe Biden has had a remarkable 50-year career in politics. Actually, 52-year career. I remember I was working in the United States Senate for Senator Ed Muskie when Joe Biden was elected as a 29-year-old in 1972, and but he wasn't going to assume office until he was 30, which is the constitutional requirement for the Senate. He's always been viewed as a rising star, and I think a lot of people assumed he'd be president and a lot sooner than 2020. I'd say he's going to have a decidedly mixed legacy as president. Biden ran for president twice on his own and didn't get anywhere in 1988. He had to pull out because of a plagiarism scandal. In 2008, he got less than 1%. and the cards all aligned, and the stars all aligned for him in 2020. Country wanted somebody who was mature and sort of a grandfather to bring us back to normal from the chaos of Trump. And so that was a perfect time for him. Unfortunately for him, he was also at that time 77 years old. And so as I look at his presidency, I think the real goal and the promise of his presidency was to end the Trump era, to bring the country back to normal. He seemed to be on the way to doing that in the 2020 election. But in the end, his presidency, his performance, his own personal stubbornness wound up leading to Trump's resuscitation. So that's probably going to be his overriding legacy, I think. Yeah, he's done a lot of good work with Congress. He's passed a lot of important legislation. Some of the things that have long-term payout, like the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS bill. But I think he also always seemed, basically, I guess he always showed his age. And I say that as somebody who is his age. He always seemed just a little bit slow on the issues of the day. He was slow to move on inflation. He was slow to react to the Afghan withdrawal mess. He was slow on the border. He, never really appreciated the impact that the crime issue was having. I mean, there was even a case where we were having a shortage of baby formula, and he was sort of chasing it. And so on the issues of the day, he really hasn't done a very good job, and that's why he's leaving office with a 34% approval rating. And I looked last night, Craig, I'm sorry to say, that's the same as George H.W. Bush. But really, other than Richard Nixon, that's the lowest level of any president in our lifetime. And the other thing, I think he's leaving office with a sour feeling in the country. I think last night he gave a decent speech, pretty good speech, and he tried to become Eisenhower and warn of the tech industrial complex. That may turn out to be a prescient warning, and that would help his legacy over time. But I really think that the hope for Biden in having a good legacy or a lasting legacy is that as the feelings of the day fade, the mood of the country, people won't remember what the mood of the country was in 2024, 30 years from now. But his legislative accomplishments will become a much bigger part of the legacy. They'll point out projects built from the infrastructure bill, the way we look at things built by the New Deal. So that to that degree, his legacy may be resuscitated a little bit. But I really think we don't know at this time. We'll just have to wait.
Craig, do you agree with Al?
Somewhat. It's a remarkable, 52-year journey that he's been on, and I think we have to acknowledge that whether people agree with him or disagree with him, his willingness to stay in the arena and engage the way he has done is remarkable and worthy of our respect. I think in some ways he has a problem that George H.W. Bush also had, and that is after the first term as president, the fact of the matter is he'd been in the White House 12 years, 8 as vice president, same with Bush, and then 4 as president. And I think the country just got tired of the style of leadership. I also think that, fair or unfair, he just wasn't seen as a strong force, whether it was age or voice or, as Al points out, slowness to act at times. I think people wanted somebody stronger, and they also wanted, as we've said before, voters across the land wanted somebody who understood the problems they were going through, and somebody who's been in the federal government 52 years, is not likely to be able to, carry that image.
Mm.
I think he brought. I think one of the things that I respect him for is he brought people, very talented people, with him through this journey, who were very loyal, who worked very hard. We talked about Blinken, but there are a number of others in both his White House staff and his cabinet, and that's a form of leadership that is admirable.
Mm.
I heard a commentator the other night say that many of the initiatives and policies he launched as president are popular, but he doesn't enjoy the popularity that comes from them. I don't know that it's just communication. I think that's part of it, but that's also a responsibility of the president. I just think he could not drive into that end zone often enough. The speech last night was a farewell of sorts. It was a lot of things he wanted to say, perhaps too many topics, but a lot of things he wanted to say and cautions he wanted to leave us with. I think, as with George Herbert Walker Bush, George W. Bush, Clinton, Carter, his numbers are likely to go up over time. Both the infrastructure projects, the employment projects, healthcare, that kind of thing. I think I'll be viewed more favorably over time, and thus he'll be viewed more favorably over time. There's one thing that left me concerned last night. It came in the form of a quip, which was when the reporter asked, whether Trump should get credit or Biden should get credit, and he spun around and said, "Is that a joke?" There's a sense that both President Biden and the First Lady have a fair amount of disdain for certain people who pushed him out, denied him the chance to run again, or the media who's been critical. And, that's a very powerful and negative force. And in a human sense, any individual who works this hard, this long in public office, who's defeated, goes through a lot of remorse and a lot of questioning.
Right.
But holding disdain for people that have been allies and friends in the past is not a good way to recover from this. And so I'm hopeful that over time that goes away, and he finds a path in the future that he finds rewarding. He certainly deserves to do so.
Dave, I think one of the things that, it clearly affected this election. I don't know how it's going to affect the long-term legacy, but Biden, undermined himself by, and the White House staff did him no great service by covering up his decline. That was even if you watched last night, it was a pretty well-written speech, but he had a hard time delivering it.
Yeah.
You sit there and you say, I hope he's going to make it through.
Yeah.
And he just wasn't up to another term, and he held all. That's what I meant by stubbornness when I mentioned it. But there's another point that Craig mentioned that I think is really important. Biden did have all these legislative achievements. I'm not sure they mean very much in politics anymore, because the government is almost like a Senate speech these days. It just doesn't perform very well. And, I've been in discussions with a lot of people in the last few weeks about what the Democrats ought to do. And one of the things that was really critical to FDR, and it's central to what I worry about in politics, is that I think if you want to have an activist government and have government programs, you got to be a government reformer. You got to constantly work to make it work. My mentor, Senator Ed Muskie, one of my mentors, said one time, "What's so damn liberal about wasting money?" And I think that's the way the American people feel right now, and it's a broad feeling in the country. And if the Democrats are going to come back, and if Biden was going to lead a renaissance in the Democratic Party, he really needed to focus on that.
Yeah.
In the Clinton administration, we never offered a new initiative without also saying we're going to reinvent the program, reinventing government. And I just think that's an important point. And I think if Biden had spent a little more time worrying about making government work better, he may have been in a much better shot position.
Well, we have to leave it there. We start next week with a new president. I'm not sure we have much to talk about after the last 4 years. But Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.